Hi, welcome to another episode of On the Waterfront. I'm Weston LaBar with Waterfront Logistics, and I'm here today with Vincent Iacopella, who runs government and trade policy as well as strategy for Alba Wheels Up. Vince, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Weston. Thanks.
Tell us a little bit about Alba Wheels Up. Somebody asked me earlier, do you guys make wheels? And I said, no. I said, but what you do is probably more important than that.
We get two calls, one wheel makers and then private jet companies too.
Yeah.
But so we are in business 72 years. We are a trade sensitive customs broker, freight forwarder, full service. And we are very deep into verticals that what we call trade sensitive, which now customs calls trade priority. Those are fancy words for it's more involved, it's harder, subject to multi-agency. It's stuff the government cares about, right? So if you look at our verticals, which is basically apparel, a lot of it from Asia and China, a lot of action going on there right now. And then semiconductors, also southern border and Asia. Now we have with Steer Group in Philadelphia, we have frozen protein and we have produce, fresh produce as well. You might look at that and say, well, people do ask me what they all have in common, and they're multi-agency, they're sticky, there's liability for the importer. So our strategy as a customs broker and a freight forwarder and a 3PL is to de-risk that supply chain on several levels, tariff-wise, forced labor-wise, and reduce dwell, keep things moving. Many of these compliance issues we think are compliance, or we think are regulatory issues, but they're actually supply chain disruption if not handled properly. So that's what we do.
Yeah, and we'll get into the supply chain disruption component because, as you know, anytime we have these issues, the longer they take place, the more likely there is to have to dig out of some sort of bottleneck. But you and I have gotten the chance to work together in a lot of different ways for the last decade. We've worked closely on policy issues, and I'm really glad you're here because you're one of the most highly regarded and well-respected people on customs issues. You're always sought after, and you've actually helped a lot of your clientele navigate the different tranches of tariffs through either 45 Trump administration or now 47 Trump administration. And we were together at Mayor Rex Richardson's press conference on the impact tariffs have locally. But you started talking about what's different between this round versus last round as it relates to your clients, your customers, their ability to act quickly or to pause on any action. Talk about the difference between 2018 into 2019 versus today.
Wow, that's a great question. Organize that response. I think there's several things different. And if you listen to what I think the trade said at the beginning of this time around, back in March, back in April 2, April 9. At 2018, I hate saying this in front of my customers, but it was a somewhat manageable tariff in that you can take various strategies of you can actually stay in China and maybe renegotiate some pricing or work with the retailers if you were in consumer goods about passing those on. And it was the highest tariffs anybody had ever seen up until then, but somewhat workable, predictable. It was a phased adoption. If you remember, there was list 1, 2, 3, and 4. You knew when it was going to happen. You knew what the number was, and you knew it was about China. And pretty much at that time only about China. So there was predictability, there was a phased adoption. One could build a strategy around that. I think this time around, if you get feedback from all the stakeholders, and I know, and by the way, very kind with your introduction, but right back at you. I mean, I've been working with you for 10 years in the port and literally gone to you and every difficult challenge that we had in 21 and 22.
Thank you.
There's not one we didn't try to tackle without me calling you to see what you thought about it. And later on, it'd be interesting to see where that's going to go this time as well. So what's different this time? You keep hearing that I think I made one point about 2018 when President Biden came in after President Trump. Those were not rolled back. They were kept in place. Any member of Congress in either party at any time could have introduced a bill to roll them back. Nobody did it, right? So that says a lot that it had kind of become part of the landscape and infrastructure.
And just to pause, when you say it was predictable,
mm-hmm.
what you're really saying is typically policy, the way it would work is you sit down with the experts, you talk about what you're thinking about, and then afterwards there's a timeline given for compliance.
Timeline.
That part.
Which countries?
Yeah. So that
and
part.
How much do I pay?
Well, what I'm saying is all that stuff was sort of pre-negotiated. Here's who will be affected. These are the countries. This is the tariff, and here's how long you have to figure out a solution before it kicks in.
Right.
Fast forward to now, it's the inverse.
What's different now, and you have to really separate certain things, like the reciprocals from the non-China countries is still at 10% until July 9, and we'll see what happens there. It's really, with the April announcements, April 2, April 9, you have these really onerous China, right, but making it almost impossible to sustain that, not sustainable. You and I were in the same discussions, right? You heard the same things I heard. All sorts of things start to happen in July about supply chain, about customer product availability at that rate. So I think what's different this time is people won't invest substantially in altering the supply chain unless they know the answers to those questions. Because if I'm going to find all new suppliers in Vietnam and Malaysia, I really need to know what the plans are for Vietnam and Malaysia, right? Ironically, not so ironically, I see Mexico benefiting because USMCA is still in effect, right? And the way the winds are blowing, it looks like it will remain in effect, which would give it an advantage over other Western Hemisphere countries, over Asia, who will have these higher tariffs. So, but all of that is still up in the air. And even with this announcement in May, 2 weeks ago, Sunday, about a May 14 reduction on anything you enter after May 14, back down to 30%, it's still only 90 days, right? Mm-hmm. So it's you're punting every 90 days. And I think the private sector wants certainty. Look, you and I have been dealing with China most of our careers. We both came up in LA, and I think started. It's
kind of a big part of the cargo profile. What with 70% of our cargo coming through the nation's
we are a
largest
Pacific
gateway.
Rim market, right?
Yeah.
So I've dealt with China my whole career. Did there need to be a reset on certain parts of the China-U.S. trade policy for years? Absolutely. So rather than getting into talking about the goals of the policy or whether the policy should be pointing this way or that way, I think what you're hearing constructively are private sector businesses talking about the tactical impact. This is what it's going to do to our business now in the next 45 days, next 90 days, whatever. And that's where I think the certainty is needed.
And without a clear pivot point. As I like to say, whether you love them, you hate them, good, bad, or indifferent, I think that as a president, Trump's been very open about the fact that he thinks there needs to be more balanced trade in both of his administrations. I think that most people would understand and appreciate what the end goal is, which is trying to create more domestic manufacturing, trying to be less reliant on foreign resources. But it's how do you get there, right? It's how do you get there and how do you build a business around it? As I've said, logistics is the modern day manufacturing. So I would hate to see a situation where the jobs we've created, really good paying jobs, are sacrificed in the name of other jobs that may or may not have a level of automation. But nonetheless, as you look at the issue, the biggest difference is that it was well thought out, it was well communicated, and you knew what you were dealing with, and there was a pivot point.
And there's one more difference, I think. That's absolutely right. The other difference is, is it, and I think this is a debate that may be happening inside our government, are the tariffs the goal for revenue, or is it a tool?
And that's just it.
right? Because if it's a tool and you get what you want, you lose the revenue because you take it away, right? But if it's the goal, let's have a clear discussion about the goal, because having done apparel for 30 years, I'm just knowing the supply chain, knowing the manufacturers in Central America and Mexico and in China and in Malaysia, Vietnam. Um, the experts are telling me apparel manufacturing is not coming here, right? So will apparel manufacturing come back to the United States? It won't. So what's the goal there? Is it for it to go to Mexico or Honduras like in 09 and 2010? And then I keep hearing on manufacturing side, what's different is the robotics, right? Like maybe if something does come back, automotive, for instance, is that going to be robots?
And that's highly automated, and that's the biggest. And I think that's the biggest thing. Fast forwarding, so it's the lack of business continuity, but then also it's an expansion. So one of the things you've educated me on is de minimis. And first of all, can you talk a little bit about de minimis before we start to get into the different types of customs designations for bonds and FTZs and everything? Yeah. I think the one part is de minimis has always been exempt, and now it is part of the discussion. And talk a little about what de minimis is and how how it's being viewed and what changes could happen, but also what that really means, because e-commerce is going to get massively impacted by the de minimis.
And you talked about some uncertainty. Look, it's a very hot button issue for years. I think we started talking about this on the COAC, Customs Operational Advisory Committee, FACA committee, back in 2015, 16, 17. Here we are 10 years later. It's something that's hard to drive consensus because it's competing business models, distribution models. The de minimis allows goods to come in the country if they were valued under $800 and the consumer was identified at the time of import. And there were other restrictions like anti-dumping or other types of restrictions that would disqualify it. The big change there is that since 1993, since the Mod Act, it was like 200, 250 roughly for the de minimis. And then in 2016 with the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, it shot up to $800, right? So you take the $800 shooting up, then you have COVID, the lockdown, and you have a huge increase in home spend, like direct-to-consumer spending. And it was like the perfect storm. And I don't have to, I used to trip over the boxes coming out of my house.
I still do sometimes.
You still do, right? So it's evident what happened there. It just exploded. Our strategy at our company had been like, we want our customers to succeed. We do the overwhelming majority of what we do is traditional, formal entries. A lot of our customers are licensees or brand holders. So we we like when we engage in that space, we like it safe, we like it clean. We were advocates for more data, the de minimis data pilot, additional data, 10-digit harmonized code, real values, real sellers showing. So we were coming out of it at a certain point where maybe there was a narrowing of the application, but a much more responsible application, until this. So as of May 2nd, there is no de minimis from China. It's been suspended. The question is going to be on these other countries with reciprocal tariffs. I've heard a couple of things. I've heard that until the EO says de minimis is not applicable to those other countries, it is, right? So right now, out of India or Malaysia, you can still use de minimis, just not out of China. The other experts, lawyers smarter than me, but much smarter than I am, will say, well, when those reciprocals are decided, those executive orders will have a de minimis restriction. I don't know. You have to kind of wait and see. So to your point, the disruption is that everything from China that was coming out on de minimis now has to come in on a formal entry, duty paid, more traditional entry, and that is a big model shift.
And functionally speaking, because I just want people to understand. So we were approached by a large e-commerce marketplace company who deals with a lot of direct-to-consumer freight that would qualify for de minimis.
Right.
And one of the things that they've been looking for is somebody with a CFS bond specifically, because how it could impact the flow of goods coming in the country, because now all of a sudden they'll have to segregate certain things that were not cleared, which could, if you understand customs, if I have a whole bunch of things on one through bill of lading that's at the port, and I have one container that hasn't cleared customs, I can't move the other 99 in that batch of 100. It's the same thing now for small parcel if you're not able to invoke de minimis to a certain extent, correct?
Yeah, and that was always the name of the game in direct to consumer, because you don't want dwell, right?
Yeah.
And we had direct to consumer prior to 2016. Our customers would pay the duty, put it into a DC in the US, and you drop it from a United States distribution center, and you could be anywhere in the country in 2 days, right? So we had it before. This direct to consumer from Asia pre-labeled broadens the transit time, right? And the question becomes, how long will the U.S. consumer wait? Like, what's the anticipation? We heard things like, nobody will ever do 7 days. Nobody will ever do 8 days. Well, look, people do 7 days. They do 8 days now, right? They do 6 days. So to your point, the dwell issue always was very sensitive and direct to consumer. And now again, to your point, because if you don't get that release timely, it will dwell. Moving it to a container freight station allows it to come off the airport, right, or off of the seaport. That was built into the model previously. But you and I talked, after this amazing tour of Waterfront, and just how this business is.
It's a unique 85-acre site, my friend. 600,000 square feet of trailer.
I was saying I'm not going to plug it, but I had to. I was like, it's really unique in its size, and the stuff they're doing here is pretty amazing. But just in the conversation that you and I had previously, the market finds. I think you and I talked about this years ago. Like, there's water going down the mountain, and the market's gonna find the most efficient.
It's so funny.
No matter what you do or I do.
So Mike Jacob was just on, and he literally said, "Freight's like water; it finds the path of least resistance."
And the finance departments of the companies that are importing will find that most efficient way. So we have all this stuff like, is it better foreign trade zone? Is it better type 4 bonded warehouse? We had some off discussion, but we'll repeat it for the benefit here.
Let's hop into that, because I think there's been a lot of discussions about customers will call and say, do you have a bonded facility? And they don't 100% know what that means, because there's a lot of different types of designations when you're going through the customs process as what is a bond, right? Because you have a CFS bond.
Right.
You have a class 3 or class 4 bond. You have a foreign trade zone, which a lot of people conflate with them. So can you just talk a little bit about the benefits of
I'm going
each
to
one?
Talk about the benefits. Having grown up in a CFS station in New Jersey, I know how the bond works. I was doing my homework.
Italian guy in freight from New Jersey.
Yeah, so
go figure.
I would be doing my homework, and there would be a customs inspector in a little room, and the containers would come in. So the bonding, it's really quite revolutionary if you look at the 80s till now, how much is able to come off dock, right? You could do inspections in CFS stations. Now, I think LA, Long Beach is the absolute leader on central exam sites. It was the first to do it. We have some of the biggest here for produce and everything else. Without getting into the weeds on the nuances, the big question that came up with the tariffs is, do I do foreign trade zone, or do I do like a class 4 warehouse entry? And based on the way the EOs are written, and based on the rules of the FTZ, the foreign trade zone, in almost all cases, putting it into a foreign trade zone, you will have to pay the duties on the date that it goes into the zone, or what the duties were when it went into the zone. So putting it into the zone, you can't hold and then come out later. In most cases, I hear some people saying there are exceptions. I haven't seen them, but then the class 4, the warehouse entry we've been doing since the 90s on all apparel. When we didn't have the quota, when we didn't have the right documents to get it in, we used to do it all the time. We put it in a warehouse entry, and we do pay the duty rate when you withdraw.
So if I'm just breaking down those 3 different types at a high level for the viewers and listeners to know, a CFS is a designation that the tactical reasoning for it is if you've got a whole bunch of different
container freight station.
Yeah, container freight station. A CFS bond allows you, if you have some things on a through bill of lading that have cleared customs.
The real CFS is born to DVAN consolidations, right?
And that's
the container's coming. There's 10 house bills in there. You're gonna DVAN that container
and sort and segregate the cargo.
Segregate, pick up by house bill. That was the spirit and the primary function of the CFS was that to get those consolidated containers off.
Especially because you'll have different importers with different BOLs in the same container in that instance, right? House bills right. in that same container. And if one of your if one of your roommates or container mates didn't clear their customs, you could be held at risk as well. And so that allows for it. And the reason it's been brought up again with de minimis is if you're bringing in a whole bunch of small parcels really from a different end customer, but it's a house bill of lading for you as the entity of record, it allows you to sort and segregate all those different parcels. So the folks that have done their job and cleared customs, or in this instance, should it apply, they get to keep moving. The folks that haven't get segregated into a bonded portion of the warehouse.
For the most part, that's exactly right.
And then for the Class 4 bond, this is what most people are really looking for in this.
That's an entry. That's not a consolidated container. That's me as the broker making an entry, putting it in the bonded facility, and then making a final withdrawal at a later date. And it's the traditional bonded warehouse.
It's sort of like, for lack of better terms, it's layaway from a customs perspective. You're paying for it when you're taking it out of the facility, not when it necessarily hits the docks.
That's right.
It's extending that window of when you need to clear customs, and whenever you clear customs is when you pay the fee for whatever it is on that day.
And the foreign trade zone is the same thing, but it's not the same rate.
And an FTZ is more the inverse, in the sense like you still are on the hook for whatever it was when it hit the dock.
You still pay it when it comes out, but you're going to pay the rate that it is when you take it out.
Correct. So really it's a strategy for preserving capital on the front end, especially if you're doing, like, if you do something like e-commerce, you end up paying it when you withdraw it from the facility, but it's still you're getting charged for whatever day you put it in the facility.
Yeah.
And so an FTZ is a great long-term strategy. A lot of people use it, but it's not necessarily going to shield you from tariffs, because if it hit the docks and you have a 145% tariff, you're still going to pay that, not a 30% tariff.
In this narrow, well, not so narrow, but it's in this very specific situation that you've described, Weston, right? It's not going to operate the same way as the FTZ, to your point, right?
Yeah, and then so maybe that's
why there's such tight space for bonded warehousing right now all over the country.
So, and that was going to be my next question. So, as an importer, of record, who do you recommend looks at the Class 4 bond versus who looks at the FTZ? Because they're very different things, really.
I can tell you, I think in the short term, I described Alba in the beginning as a trade sensitive or trade priority broker. And this is where, every couple of years, like 23, 24, sensitivity goes down, there's not a lot of congestion. And maybe a trade sensitive broker, the value is not immediately obvious, right? But then something like this happens and the value is like there. So one, I think it's important to have a partner, whether it's your broker or your freight forwarder, your trade attorney, that's going to help you with that strategy, right? They're going to tell you why the FTZ is better than the bonded warehouse, and vice versa. The other situation, to your point, is I think you have to incorporate it into your larger strategy, which is hard for all the reasons you and I just said. We don't know what the whole strategy is, but really, in the short term, you're 100% right. Like the bonded warehouses, or the demand for that, so to kind of hold as long as you can, and then decide, right? Is right. Definitely leverage your partners, have the right partners. The other, we are seeing some long-term strategies, which I think makes sense on foreign trade zone for some manufacturers in the tech sector, right?
Especially, they're bringing components in, and they don't have to pay the duty on the component until it's actually shipped out as a final product.
Right, and then you get you definitely have to. We have a team, we have a partner and a team that actually experts at that. and they'll advise the customer on that. The manufacturing foreign trade zone, we see more of that coming. It's a longer term play.
Well, I was just going to dive into that. You brought up something I wasn't even thinking of, but obviously we talked about the desire for more manufacturing, and a lot of it is really around high end, high value manufacturing. What's going to happen
Right.
in the U.S. And I think a lot of people forget that most manufacturers actually source all their componentry
A lot.
from everywhere,
A
right?
lot.
I always use and everybody will say he just talked about this, but I use the iPhone, right? You have a California company, Apple. They design the iPhone, then they go all over the world, and they have folks that are specialty in semiconductors, screens, microchips, etc. They source it, they bring it to an assemblance hub, and that's their version of manufacturing now. Is they put those things together, and then out it goes to consumers.
I mean, there was a statistic on COAC. I don't know who said it to me, and I hope I don't mess it up. But I'll probably get the number wrong. But someone had a statistic on how often one automobile crosses the Canadian-U.S. border, and it was like way more than you would ever think. It was like higher than 7 or 8. Like it just crosses back and forth, back and forth. Not only the parts, but the labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. And to your point, I think we want to encourage U.S. Tech manufacturing, but they are heavily dependent on Asian components. And I don't, I'm sure experts in the sector can discuss it, but how ready are we to source that locally and get that locally? So I definitely think one of the hidden, and I know the administration has heard this because we know some of the companies I might have heard it from. I think that's one of the underlying things that is lacking in this execution is that I think there should be some consideration for U.S. manufacturers that are dependent on, especially in steel and aluminum, right? That are because steel and aluminum hits hard.
We have a lot of steel and aluminum and various metal products here, but it's interesting. Like we went through and we were looking at some of the products, and we were talking about some of the recent statistics thrown out by Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, and who's hit by what portions of the tariffs. We still have fashion transload product coming through, but if you look, it's all Vietnam. It's all from countries that are not China. And even you saw we have hundreds of thousands of square feet filled with metal products and different types of
all the front loading.
It's all been front loaded because they were trying to figure it out. But if you look, it's all coming from Japan and Vietnam and Korea. It's not coming from China. I think that Chinese steel really dropped off in 2018 when the first round of tariffs went in.
And President Biden had 232s as well.
Yeah,
on that. But that's, I'll let you go there first. But that begs the question about with these 90 days starting May 14 for China, what can we expect? Going into July.
Well, talk a little bit about that because you deal directly with customers who are bringing in product. What is you talk about if you've met with one of them, they all have different strategies based on their unique business and on what they think they can and can't accomplish in the short term. So walk me through if somebody still is.
I'm going to go macro
shipping,
because
please.
I'm going to go macro so we don't talk about one brand or one customer, but in the apparel in general, right? With the trade groups and some of the meetings that our team has been in, trade market meetings. The thought was after May 14 after the Sunday before May 14th, when they announced that, do you get, as an open question to you as well, to me, we're all experiencing this together. Do you get an August 2020 type surge where people start front loading again with the 30%, right? We talked about this in the mayor's meeting last week, privately and publicly. What can you expect? I think that anything that's already manufactured and produced moves.
Yep.
We're sitting in LA. We have LA Long Beach. We can really, people talk about 14-day boats, 15-day boats. We have 11-day boats. We have 12-day boats. Like you could really get from Asia to here in that time. So that gives you a lot of time from now until 90 days to get goods in. The question you and I were talking about before is, are they goods that are already manufactured? Are they goods that will be ready in June, early June? It's interesting that we don't have a lot of data yet or feedback yet from companies that what are they doing on new orders? What are they doing on
Yeah.
new manufacturing? That's where that 90-day causes uncertainty. I think you've seen the same. You've heard the same. We have seen, I think, a 12 to 14% across the whole market, uptick in Southeast Asia. Vietnam, Vietnam,
Malaysia,
Thailand,
Cambodia, all of
Cambodia,
those.
Philippines, especially in apparel. And then you also see people asking a lot of questions about Mexico again,
Yep.
about going back to Mexico, which is another reason why a lot of people think Mexico has a really strong future in this. Goods that are already made definitely are front load. Definitely, the word surge was being used last week. I don't hear people using it now. You tell me.
Well, let's stick with apparel, right? Because we saw several different instances of apparel coming through or sitting in our facility. I think you've got three big buckets, and you can probably apply this across the board, but I think you got three big buckets. You've got the folks that said, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't want to play around. We do a lot of manufacturing in China, and as you saw, we have one customer who've got they're going to have 300 containers here.
I just saw that.
But we're stacking containers for the first time since the pandemic because they said we know that we don't have a sensitive
for
product.
A different reason.
Yeah, we don't have a sensitive product. We're going to bring in 6 or 8 months worth of inventory.
Last time it was demand, and now
And so it's sitting. It's basically in an outdoor warehouse to control the storage costs of front loading. But nonetheless, now we're grounding containers for front loading. I don't see them bringing in anything. Why? Because
it's already here.
Because it's here. They've already done it. Then on the complete opposite side, you have the folks that I don't think are going to do anything because, to your point, it's not already manufactured. They're looking at alternatives, and what they're really trying to figure out is what's my new strategy. But they're not necessarily in a position where they want to manufacture anymore in China for whatever reason.
I think that's the question, right? Like,
and you have the middle.
What do you and look and you were in the same meetings I was in last week, and the kind of like the word was that when those 90 days are up, it's not going to be higher than 30%. It's going to be less. But how do you know that?
You don't.
So it's going to be less. So just go back to what you were doing and start manufacturing. And we're going to work it out, which I think will probably be the case in the long run. But you just don't know. So I think the question that you're raising is huge. What happens on new manufacturing?
And a big part of it's going to be the product. If you're a super high-end fashion company on the apparel side and you can manufacture something relatively inexpensively but charge $1,000 for it, you probably bring it in because you can absorb the tariff.
I'm seeing that. I'm seeing it on the fast fashion.
Yep.
That they're paying the tariff.
And
some people are going to pay it.
If it's a $5 T-shirt, you don't have that though.
Yeah.
And so in that instance, you either front loaded it. So that's the other thing is the commodities are different.
Oh,
so
the sector, what's happening in durables and what's happening with apparel, and the cycle time in manufacturing is totally going to be a factor. Weighing in. I'm thinking that I don't want to go too far in this talk. Get ahead of my skis, but I'm not hearing the word surge this week. I heard it last week, but I'm not hearing surge this week.
As I told you, walking through the facility with folks last week, I was like, this wasn't here 2 weeks ago. This wasn't here a week ago. Like you can physically see the front loading.
Yeah.
Now, as I said today, as I went through, I was like, oh, this is full. This looks like it got a little emptier. So, I mean, people were drawing down on some of that inventory, which is interesting. And we'll see what it looks like coming forward. But last week was super busy. There was a line of trucks getting in here today.
You guys are packed today. I mean, I had trouble getting in. So
we'll get you through the bobtail next time.
Yeah, I gotta. No, so I mean, I think that's the open question. I having said everything we've said, I think though if you have any companies that had orders that were completed or close to completion are going to definitely take advantage between now and if they can.
Otherwise,
right?
You have to pay for something along the lines, whether it's you're paying for it to stay at the manufacturing center, maybe it's been loaded in a container. Are you paying to store it at a marine terminal?
There's been the anecdotal about the canceled orders and what the magnitude of that was, how much of that was really canceled.
A lot of it was soft cancellations, my understanding.
That's where I was going with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so let's pivot. Unfortunately, we don't have forever, but we can always do this again.
You and I could talk forever.
Yeah, I have that problem even when there's nobody around. So, but I think one of the things that is front and center always is the American exporter, right? And we talked a little bit about, because we have export product here. We have some bulk export product that it's here because the optionality on vessel strings is not what it was. Maybe because of retaliatory tariffs. The market they had is not a market they currently have, but they're hoping it will be again. Right. So we provide that speed to market, but you deal with importers and exporters. Mm-hmm. Talk about what some of the impacts have been for exporters, because it's not about bonded warehouses. It's really about do I have a market anymore? How do I get into the market that wants my product where there hasn't been a pricing index skewing because of any sort of retaliatory tariffs? And really, the difficulties exporters are dealing with is completely different, but it's all part and parcel to what the importers are dealing with.
It's the same supply chain. So it's funny. They'll do two buckets. The first bucket is, are there difficulties because U.S. Protein exporters now face retaliatory tariffs in Asia, particularly China? Absolutely. I'm hearing at the same time that their strategies they're very agile, right? And their strategies around other terminal markets for that. More practical comment, more tactical comment would be, remember, 2020, 21. If containers can't come in, you don't have empties going out, right? And there's just a practical, and then ocean carriers can make decisions about sending boats out, not full, to get them back to Asia and load them back.
Especially if you get that surge you were talking about. This is what happened during the pandemic that people don't realize is the bottleneck really got created. First of all, we had a complete shutdown of the supply chain. That globally, that's not going to happen this time. No. So, we saw that even the ports had record volumes in 2024, and we didn't have any issues about
25.
Right? Nobody heard anything about ships waiting or congestion or any of that. No. I would say the terminal operators,
amazing, actually.
The ports, the operators coming in and out of the trucking companies, warehouse, everybody's done a really phenomenal job of adjusting to higher volume global shipping. But the thing that people don't realize is that once demand picks back up, if there's a surge, then you want to get ships back to Asia to pick up loaded containers to the largest consumer market in the world, which is the United States. And then as we're emptying the contents out of those containers, it's happening via truck at warehouses. It's also happening in the inland.
Well, a perfect example is two things. If these containers are full on your yard, they're not available. They're not going back with exports, right? That's the practical. And then there's the issue of if the ocean carriers start to make strategic decisions about where to put equipment, right, to begin with. So I think that's 100% right.
Well, it's also, again, closest seaport to Asia. Containers coming through the ports of LA Long Beach end up in every congressional district in the country. Mm-hmm. How do you get a lot of those back to the ports? It's via rail. So not only do you have truckers making appointments to return empty containers, you have trains that show up that are miles long with empty containers that may or may not have come through the ports of LA Long Beach. And what happens is the terminals fill up. They're a finite resource with only so much space. They can't then take more empty containers in a local market. So during the pandemic, you saw ships come in full, leave partially full, maybe 60, 70% full. The terminals filled up. Then the truck yards filled up. Then all the new truck yards filled up, so on and so forth. And you ended up with just a complete bottleneck throughout the supply chain. That's the part I think the logisticians, if you will, are looking at is at what point in time do we break the system again? Because a broken...
let me add one question to you
please.
On that. You're supposed to be asking me the questions. But so what do you think the FMC does about from the last time around where they said that, they'd be more on top of things like that so that U.S. exporters had the equipment? I mean, that's a factor.
Yeah, I think the difference this time is that exporters definitely have a seat at the table. I mean, if you even look at the China built ship fee, most of the changes that happened to that were because exporters came out, and Peter Friedman does a great job with AgTC and his group, amongst others.
Right.
But they said, listen, if you do this, we have customers that complete supply chain is built around going through a certain seaport. So as I've said, if you did that, you take away optionality. No ships are going to show up in Oakland. If you have every time the vessel calls a docking fee, essentially. There's a lot that you don't need to go to them. So now do we just move all exports through the ports of LA, Long Beach? Some would like that, some wouldn't.
But this is a great example of something that was proposed. Stakeholders weighed in, right? AAEI did a paper. The Resiliency Committee did a paper, and AAI as well. Stakeholders weigh in, and the result is people might not like the result, but it's more of a workable result than the original. You may complain about the fee now. Look what the fees could have been, right?
Yep.
And then per voyage instead of per port, so you could prorate the cost among all the other ports, right? So I mean, that's a perfect example of how it could work, right?
Well, you look at it. You're not going to replace, decades. For decades now, we have not been the world's leading builder of ships. You go back 70s, 80s, really, we started to see global manufacturing of ships. It's been a long time since we've been at the forefront of that. And then on top of it, you've got the administration that wants to see additional Navy ships built. So how are you going to build a whole new armada of Navy, ships, right? How are you going to build a whole armada of both military ships and then also service the private market? So it's not like overnight you're going to start building ships in the U.S. for containerized commercial reasons. However, you do avoid what I would call punitive impact to the exporter. You do avoid the impact it could have to the vessel string, because now whether you're calling one seaport or 5 seaports, you pay that same fee. And it also exempted out the American flag carrier. So it promotes people. At one point in time, I mean, you go back in the 90s, U.S. Lines was...
It was a more market friendly. And it wasn't a total back off of the... I mean, look at on liquid natural gas, I think they put a 22-year phase, talking about phase adoption, right? 22 years is a long time. So I don't think it was a total retreat, but it was a market friendly adjustment.
It was, by all intents and purposes, it was a win for most, right? It was palatable for most, right? And there's some that aren't going to be happy, but good policy is that you're going to have people that are unhappy no matter what, because you're changing something. But I think, if I look at it, that's a good example of how exporters were included, and that's a good example of how policy was changed to not harm American trade going outward. I would just say, what are the big hot button items? Again, importers looking at bonded and whatnot. Your customers specifically, what are they looking at? Because it's got to be, where can they sell their product and what ships can they get on, I would imagine.
I think we've covered the bonded situation. I think that importers of consumer products have some different questions and strategies than manufacturing. Because if you're manufacturing, that cost is now going to your unit cost. And they might make different decisions. On consumer products, you have a retail or a direct-to-consumer, and I think it's all about the price point at that point. You'll see it play out in the media right now. What happens to that extra duty? Who pays it? And is it going to get passed on to the consumer, which it always does? Is it going to go to the consumer, or something else going to happen?
Is there enough elasticity in that product to absorb some of it?
And look, I think we're gonna finish where we started. It's all about it's all about the amount of that tariff, right? What you can do with it,
and the product that it's applied to,
and then the margin you have in that product. Without talking about specific prices, but it's all about what do I do with that extra cost? Where does it go? And what does it mean for all these importers are companies with bottom line and projections, and
many publicly traded.
Some, right. And what does it do to the forecasting and projections, right?
Yeah. So we'll wrap it up with this. I always used to ask people, get your crystal ball out. I've abandoned that one. I don't want to look at the crystal ball. But I think what I would say is, what's the one strongest piece of unsolicited advice you would give to a shipper, an importer or an exporter, as it relates to how to best prepare for this?
Look, I just look at what we did in our own company in 2020 and 2021 at Alba. We pivoted from apparel to personal protection equipment because the factories did. Um, I think that the same high level strategy works for importers in that those who are agile and those who can take care of, who can act on opportunities quickly and can pivot more quickly are going to benefit, right? I mean, those that will adjust to Vietnam or some other country, or
The China plus one, the China plus
well,
two.
I know some consumer product brands are looking at all their SKUs and which ones they're really selling. You remember in 21, what moved in that August was the SKUs that were hot, right? And if it wasn't so hot, it didn't move that much. So getting more strategic about what you're bringing in and what the demand is for that, I think it's going to force efficiencies there. Yeah, the ability to pivot quickly. I think the ability to find alternative sourcing outside of China, I don't think it's possible. Some importers we know have done it. They've gotten out of China, and some have not. So if you're staying in China, their strategy might be different than, or diversifying to other countries in Asia.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing that I could say is find the right partners that can help you navigate this thing, because so many of us are generalists and know just enough, but there's folks that are actual subject matter experts. And if you don't understand customs policy, get yourself a really good customs broker that does, especially in your niche. If you're dealing with supply chain bottlenecks, find a provider that can actually help meet your new supply chain demands and your new strategies. I think that's where it starts, and then from there it continues. But Vince, I really appreciate you joining us today. Vince Iacopella with Alba Wheels Up. This has been another episode of On the Waterfront, brought to you by Waterfront Logistics, which, as you just heard Vince say, the most unique and amazing logistics facility servicing the ports of LA, Long Beach. His words, not mine. His words, not mine.
Kind of. Yeah.
But I can't ever let that one go to waste.
Well, it's pretty impressive. I will say that.
But again, I'm Weston LaBar on behalf of Waterfront Logistics. Until next time.
Thank you, Weston. Bye-bye.